250th birthday. This is the first in a series of webinars we are planning in anticipation of the 2026 National Summit on Civic Education. And I'm very excited to kick off this series with Dr. Jane Kamensky, the President and CEO of Monticello and the Thomas Jefferson Foundation. I'll introduce Jane in a moment, but first let me say just a word about the Jack Miller Center. At the Jack Miller Center, we believe that university scholars fill an essential role in sustaining American constitutional self-government. With that in mind, we aim to do three things: build and empower a network of university professors who teach the foundational ideas and documents of the American political tradition, forge new models for university-based training of K-12 teachers, and build a diverse coalition of leaders, scholars, and teachers to ignite a civic education renaissance. So I like to say we're in the movement building business. Our country needs a movement for civics. And that's why we started the National Summit on Civic Education a few years ago, to bring together leaders, scholars, educators, and funders from all throughout the country to find ways we can work together. Well, next year's summit, during our country's 250th birthday year, will take place on Independence Mall in Philadelphia, where it all began. Much in line with today's webinar, we aim to have a great conversation about the Declaration of Independence and its continuing relevance today. So mark your calendar for May 18th through 19th, 2026, and you can learn more on our website, jackmillercenter.org. Well, speaking of the Declaration, the reason I was excited to invite Dr. Jane Kamensky onto this webinar today is because of the Declaration Book Club, which we're going to hear more about in a little bit. We're going to discuss this very exciting book club she's putting together, and in partnership with More Perfect as we get into 2026. But let me give a proper introduction to Dr. Jane Kamensky. She's President and CEO of Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. A leading historian of early America and the United States, Dr. Kamensky earned her BA and PhD in history from Yale University. For 30 years, she worked as a professor and higher education leader, most recently as Jonathan Trumbull Professor of American History at Harvard University and Forsheimer Foundation Director of the Schlesinger Library on the History of Women in America at Harvard Radcliffe Institute. Dr. Kamensky is the author or editor of numerous books, including A Revolution in Color, The World of John Singleton Copley, which won 4 major prizes and was a finalist for several others. And she's also co-editor of the authoritative Oxford Handbook of the American Revolution, co-edited with the late Edward G. Gray. A former commissioner of the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery and past trustee of the Museum of the American Revolution, Dr. Kamensky serves as a member of the National Advisory Council of More Perfect and as one of the principal investigators on the NEH Department of Education funded initiative Educating for American Democracy, among many other public history roles. Welcome, Dr. Jane Kamensky.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Hans. It's great to be here.
Well, one of the reasons, of course, as I said, was excited to have this discussion is because of the Declaration Book Club. We're going to talk about that, but I first of all want to thank you for hosting, very graciously hosting our 2025 cohort of Jack Miller Fellows for a tour and meeting at Monticello in late July. It was just a terrific experience. I heard so much great feedback from all of our fellows who took part in that. It was my first time at Monticello since a school trip there back in the 5th grade. And I really found it to be a moving and deeply educational experience. We spent the morning there discussing some of Jefferson's writings at the Jefferson Library, which was a great experience in its own right. And then we went on a tour of the home and the grounds that was focused on the remarkable relationship that Jefferson had with John Adams. And then we got to spend time with you and a couple of your senior staff members, understanding how you approach your work there at Monticello. And I just, as I said, so many positive comments from our fellows. So thank you.
It was a great group and we were thrilled to host them. And I hope I'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about that Founding Friends, Founding Foes tour, which is one of our signature 250th commitments. As we, I've been at Monticello for about 20 months now. I started in January of 2024. And I came thinking that this superb historic house, museum, and fascinating landscape had untapped potential as a civil society organization, civic renewal organ. And that Founding Friends, Founding Foes tour is an example of looking to deliver content with rigor and honesty, and also to build civic skills and dispositions among our remarkable visitorship, which spans the entirety of the American political spectrum, unsiloed, right? People don't pick who they're on tours with, except when we have the opportunity to serve an intentional group like the one that you came with, and we're doing a lot of group visits for this Founding Friends, Founding Foes tour. So really leaning into that opportunity of serving America with trusted content in ways that nourish people to go back into their communities and be participants in this glorious constitutional democracy.
Well, so Monticello, I mean, it's the most famous presidential home, probably with the exception of Mount Vernon, George Washington's Mount Vernon.
And we could throw down with Mount Vernon, but we won't do that here.
And so your work there is obviously it involves preserving the historic home, the historic grounds, but it's so much more than that. What is the mission of Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, the mission of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation?
So we have a twofold mission, which is preservation and education, preserving both the legacy of Jefferson and his ideas and the actions and ideas of all the people who lived on the historic mountaintop, and then educating a vast American public, over 300,000 visitors a year on site and about 10 times that many online, in the founding of the American Republic, headlined by the guy who wrote the thing, right? We have a 250th shirt that says "Our guy wrote it," really leaning into the foundational principles of the Declaration in everything that we do. Thinking also about ways that those preservation and education missions inform each other, right? So that preserving the physicality of the place is part of creating a transformative educational experience, right? As my colleagues at Mount Vernon do, we talk about the power of place and the ways that civic lessons, even really complicated civic lessons, land when you're in a meticulously preserved environment where almost as far as the eye can see, on the north side, you see Charlottesville, so you know it's not the 18th century, but almost as far as the eye can see, you're in a space that feels like time out of mind, and that mind is Thomas Jefferson's. He thought of the architecture of the place and the built environment, which he created as an expression of his own mind and tastes. We're gifted in having such a polymathic founder as our signal, as our headliner here, where we can lean into architecture or music or the study of languages or political thought, or social and educational thought, or political economy, at which Jefferson did notably badly. There are so many things that we can program and think about with integrity under Jefferson's name. One of those, I think, badly needed in the country right now, and a sort of signal contribution for 2026 is civil discourse, right? Since Jefferson came up through the formation of the first American proto-party system, both turned up the flames of partisanship and then was singed by and thought a lot about how to transcend the fires of partisanship. So thinking about authentic learning from each other and civil discourse as a Jeffersonian theme to program in, especially during this anniversary year.
You had a distinguished career in academia. I mentioned your impressive biography, but you decided to move into this role now as president and CEO of Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. What inspired you to make that move?
So the sort of short answer that too long didn't read is that I wanted to do more civic facing work. And the longer answer is that in 2018, summer of 2018, my colleague in political theory at Harvard, Danielle Allen, reached out when she had seen an RFP from the Department of Education and the National Endowment for the Humanities, reached out about putting together a multi-institution project to create a framework for the teaching of history and civics K-12, which became Educating for American Democracy. I thought a group led by Harvard professors had a very small chance of success at that RFP, and Danielle, as she often does, said, "Let's give it a go." And we won the call and put together a 5 institution, 300-person, intentionally pluralist group that created the Educating for American Democracy framework. I was one of the PIs of its discovery phase and still serve on its executive committee and steering committee. And after we launched in 2021, I thought about why it was that the most sort of intellectually and morally satisfying work that I was doing as an early American historian was in this project that was a by occupation, right? Nights and weekends on a strictly volunteer basis, and had started to wonder, was there a way for an American historian to be a civic practitioner at a high level full time? Like, could you actually get paid for doing that work? And hadn't really gotten anywhere with that sketching when the search firm that was looking for a president for Monticello reached out. So it was wanting to do work more like Educating for American Democracy more of the time, this blending of rigorous history with civic purpose, a sense of application for the work that I had done for 3 decades as a scholar. And so far, as I said, I'm about 20 months in. So far, it has exceeded my highest expectations.
Let's just talk briefly about the Educating for American Democracy framework, since that was so pivotal in your career journey. And so, what say a little bit more about what it is, the kinds of people who came together to put it to assemble it, and what should we be thinking about educating for American democracy, or why should we be thinking about that as we prepare for our country's 250th birthday?
So, Educating for American Democracy is not a national curriculum. It's a framework, an inquiry-based framework for braiding history and civics in K-12 instruction, sort of spiraling through the grade bands. And the constituency that put it together was diverse along every axis, a sort of spherical sense of field diversity, career stage diversity, political pluralism, different locations for everywhere from the elite university to classroom practitioners to curriculum developers and providers like iCivics, Arizona's Center for Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership was a key partner in the effort. We set out really to avoid the mistakes of the National History Standards in 1993, which was in many ways the last attempt to think seriously about how we could elevate the teaching of history for civic purposes in our schools. It's inquiry based, which means it's a series of questions rather than a series of answers. And it's thematic. There are 7 themes, beginning and ending with citizen participation in our republic, and then working roughly chronologically through American history, spending a particular amount of time with the founding and the various refoundings that we've had in Reconstruction and Second Great Awakening, other social movements since. It's been now 4 years in the implementation phase and is making headway with pilot programs at many educational stages and in many states. One of the things that we've found is that the greatest uptake has been in third spaces, libraries, museums, after-school programs that have the advantage of serving intergenerational groups, that work naturally in an inquiry mode because they think through objects, and that know they have a civic purpose because they're greeting the American public in different scales every day. So I lead the Community Learning Partners Task Force, which a recent grant from Carnegie is going to bring in-house at Monticello. Over 200 organizations in 47 states and territories wrestling with the EAD questions and design challenges, right? Design challenges where we call out what are the sort of difficult questions that are features and not bugs of self-government. So things like, how do we have a plural yet shared story? How do we encourage both reflective patriotism and an honest reckoning with the stumbles of our past and inevitable stumbles of our present and future? So it's a really rich tool that should work with any group of state standards. I'm really proud to have been a part of this ongoing effort. Feels like a movement now.
Well, thank you so much for your role in that, and we've been very pleased to take a part in an implementation project and in partnership with Danielle Allen,
Yep.
We're a champion. There's a list of a number of different organizations that are champions for
Hundreds.
educating for American democracy, and we're one among those. So, as I mentioned earlier, you're launching something called the Declaration Book Club for America's 250th birthday. What is the Declaration Book Club, and how can people get involved?
So, Declaration Book Club is a free, open, online educational resource hosted at the Monticello website, monticello.org /book club will take you there. It is materials for 3 meetings of any group. We wanted to do 3 things in this project, which, as you mentioned earlier, More Perfect gave us some generous seed funding to create. We wanted to deliver content about the Declaration of Independence and its foundational and ongoing role in American civic life, right? That's our business here at the home of the primary author of the Declaration. We wanted to bring people together in groups. I think, we've all read the research that shows that our civic life is challenged by the now 3 generations in which we've been bowling alone in Bob Putnam's famous formulation. So we wanted to take advantage of the places that people come together in groups, whether it's faith-based communities or standing book clubs, classrooms, union halls, Rotary clubs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we wanted to encourage civil dialogue about important things. So Declaration Book Club is organized around 3 meetings. The first set of resources circles the moment of creation for the Declaration in 1776 and looks at what went in to making it, the voice of its primary authors, but also, as Danielle Allen puts it in her book, Our Declaration, which is excerpted in the resources, the mountain of talk about liberty on which the Declaration stood. The second meeting centers around the moment of 1826, the first sort of major look back moment about what the people who created the United States had wrought, anchored by that 50th anniversary celebration with the novelistic detail of Jefferson and Adams's near simultaneous deaths on July 4th. So that sort of stock taking moment after the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the first generations of working out the settlement of the American Revolution. And then the third meeting is the ongoing legacies of the Declaration, very much in the spirit of Museum of the American Revolution's forthcoming exhibition, The Declaration's Journey. The way, as Jefferson put it, the ball of liberty has rolled round the world, the different voices that have taken up the Declaration in Seneca Falls, in Frederick Douglass's What to the Slave is the Fourth of July, in Gerald Ford's remarks in 1776, in Ho Chi Minh's and Gandhi's uses of the Declaration for their national liberation movements. So participants should leave the third meeting answering a question that I ask in the introductory video, which is, what do you declare, right? It's a Republican self-government is a baton pass from generation generation to generation. Jefferson was our most, both our most aggressive and our most optimistic founder, thinking about that baton pass, right? Not always a return to first principles, but a need to renew and sometimes to reinvent. Jefferson with the quixotic idea that we ought to start from ground zero every 19 years, which is how he reckoned a generation. Thank goodness Madison said that was a terrible idea, because that's a terrible idea. Nonetheless, the idea of passing on the sort of open-ended clarion call of the Declaration to living generations as we think about what participants in Declaration Book Club and visitors to Monticello, people engaged with Jack Miller Center, want the country to be at the tricentennial in 2076, which I won't be here to see, but which I believe in fulsomely. So that's where we end. Is it's yours.
Mm. I mean, you're really trying to get people involved in a conversation that's not just respond to the Declaration of Independence, but all these other people have been in conversation about that over the course of our country's history. And so let's continue that kind of a conversation. I mean, the primary source approach that you're using to me seems just wonderful.
And we use a combination of primary and brief secondary sources. So each unit of the toolkit, and it's a downloadable PDF that spans about 100 pages over the 3 meetings. So it's digestible in size for anything from a high school group north, and we've had some good conversations with teachers about adopting it for middle school as well. So a timeline. I think one of historians in my view have 2 master skills. One is thinking in time, and the other is empathy with past predicaments, ultimately leading to a fuller recognition of the predicaments in which we all live, since we too live in historic time. So we start with a timeline. There are guiding questions, not to limit, but to seed discussion in the groups. Primary sources. So in the case of the 1776 meeting, both Jefferson's initial draft and then the congressional edits and final adopted version of the Declaration, early discussion about it. In the 1826 toolkit, we have some of the last letters between Jefferson and Adams. We have Daniel Webster's eulogy for these 2 founders, itself thinking about a baton pass for the boisterous sea of liberty, and so on. There are short videos for those who want to engage it online, but it should be a book club in a box. That's it's designed to be very plug and play.
Well, what kind of reception have you been getting to the Declaration Book Club so far?
So we launched on July 4th. It's been downloaded over 1,000 times in 49 states. If there is anybody on this webinar from Nevada, please get your people in line. Every place but Nevada has downloaded, and we've heard some initial responses for how people are using it in groups, which are really encouraging. I'm thinking that those 1,000 are like the circulation figures for an early American newspaper, where that 20 or 30 people are engaged with every copy. We're building in a number of synchronous discussions like this one to help people get rolling. We're doing some local in-person rollouts, and we'll do some webinar discussions too to model it. Virginia Department of Education is rolling it out quite widely around the Commonwealth in their 250th classroom toolkit. So seems to be catching on.
Great, great. Well, I want to mention to everybody that if you have questions, that you can place those in the Q&A box here on Zoom, and we'll try to get to some of those as we have time. And we do have some questions that folks have submitted in advance of this conversation as well. So we'll get to those after I ask one more question here. What other plans does Monticello have for the 250th anniversary of the Declaration?
So we're thinking of the anniversary both as a moment of celebration and accomplishment and as a shovels in the ground moment, right? So an investment for the future rather than a kind of one and done. So I mentioned earlier in our discussion the Founding Friends, Founding Foes tour, which you took with your fellows in July. That will run throughout 2025 and 2026, educating visitors on the Revolution and that sort of crucial founding friendship between Jefferson and Adams. We're engaging in a program called Feast of Reason, which is a Jeffersonian model of dinner table dialogue, right from the dinner table bargain on forward, the bringing together of deliberately unlike minds to have conversations about both easy things like do you have a favorite food and where do you call home and why, and then harder things, name a moment where you felt exceptionally proud of the United States. What are things, what are issues and techniques that you think can unite us beyond our divisions. Every year since 1963, we've done an immigration and naturalization ceremony on July 4th, where we welcome scores of new citizens and thousands of guests to cheer on these new members of the family of our republic. Ken Burns was our keynote speaker last July 4th, and we will have a spectacular ceremony, declaration, birthday party on the day itself. And then we're involved in some other collaborations with More Perfect, working on a project with a fine press in California called Arion Press. The project is called Declare a Civic Gospel, which will be contemporary interpretations of responses to the Declaration from everybody from General Jim Mattis is contributing an essay to the rigorous Indigenous legal scholar Maggie Blackwell. So that'll be a kind of ongoing anchor as well.
Terrific. Somebody asked how they can access these materials, access the book club website. It's monticello.org/book club is where you can find out more and find out more about the other activities you're just describing there, monticello.org. So let me get to just a couple of the questions that have been submitted in advance. And again, people are welcome to submit questions in the Q&A box. Somebody asks, how can we rekindle America's interest in our rich history, founding principles, founding documents, and the responsibilities of citizenship?
So I'll offer two answers to that, and I think that's our greatest opportunity and maybe our most important charge for the 250th is to engage in our history and feel the ways that it is alive in our present and compelling to all of us. I think one way is by leaning into, and this may sound like a paradox, but by leaning into the ordinariness of the founders, right? Yes, their brilliance, yes, their distinction, whether it's in the battlefield with Washington or in the cabinet with the quill with Jefferson or in the hard work of diplomacy with Franklin, but also the extent to which our country begins as our country persists with the heroic actions of rather ordinary individuals who dig deep to think about how their talents can be in service to the greater good. So by encouraging our visitors here at Monticello and in our discussions of the heroism of the founding generation nationwide, by encouraging our visitors to look eye to eye with the generations of Americans who came before them, and especially that broad founding generation. I think Jefferson and his cohort in Congress created a form of government in which we all need to be founders, right? There are no passengers on this bus. And so leaning into the facets of their lives that show them as people in predicaments in the past, and to be honest about the ways that they resolved those predicaments, that they struggled and didn't come to resolution, and then the incredible faculty of invention and reinvention that they gave us in these documents like the Declaration and the Constitution. I'm always really excited when I speak and somebody comes up to me with a pocket constitution, which happens more when I speak in spaces that are to the right of the center of our political system than when I speak in spaces that are to the left of the center of our political system. I want that sense of foundationalism to be shared across our political spectrum, right? That this is a well that we need to keep going back to and drinking from. And many of these pocket constitutions are bound with the Declaration. I think the Declaration tends to get short shrift in those discussions. So I hope that part of that renewal that your questioner asked about will extend to the Declaration too. I'll say one last thing here, which is I think the language of renewal, recommitment, rededication is in the perfect register for an anniversary, right? It's an anniversary asks us to reflect and inspect. It also asks us to sort of re-enlist in what people at the time called the common cause, and which still needs to remain our common cause if we're, in Franklin's words, to keep it.
Well said. Thank you so much. Another question we got in the chat box here, Q&A box, is what do you think is the most common misunderstanding or misconception of the Declaration of Independence for current college and high school students? What do you think is the source of this misunderstanding, misconception?
That's a great question. And I guess my first response is I wish we were in a place where knowledge of the Declaration was wide enough that people could have a misconception. I think that we pay insufficient attention to it altogether. And then, for those who have the fluency to have misconceptions about it, I would say that it's thinking about the document, except for that soaring second paragraph, we hold these truths to be self-evident, as being entirely time-bound, right? Those 27 grievances as things that you might not have to have a PhD, but you'd have to have a whole lot of learning to know what their specific reference were in the imperial struggles of the 1760s and 1770s. Declaration Book Club and my own work talking about the Declaration thinks that that's not true at all, right? This is a portrait in the breach of good government, right? So that if you look at those 27 grievances as being examples of when a quite novel idea of good government, accountable government, government dependent on the consent of the people who are no longer willing to suffer evils while evils are sufferable. The breaches of this dawning idea of good government, we wind up with a pretty good roadmap of what an accountable government should look like. It's the roadmap that the Constitutional Convention used 11 years later to move from a vision to a blueprint, and also a map of what tyranny looks like, right? I would love to see the high school students with misconceptions sort of indexing, civilian control of the military or its breach, right? Like that, you could build a balance sheet of good government out of the Declaration with very little understanding needed for, what specifically were they, do you have to learn the Quebec Act? No, as a historian, it does help you root the document in time. But as a statement of principles, I think we miss out by not reckoning back from those 27 grievances to principles of good government.
Wow. So, you're immersed every day, and you've been immersed throughout your career in history and the story of our past. Um, but as go about your work every day at Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's estate, what gives you hope for the future?
Um, I think that we are having a wide national discussion about these documents now. Gives me hope. I think the anniversary is an opportunity for hope, and then the Monticello specific piece is, every day I see masses of ordinary Americans who disagree about almost everything, wanting to engage in a serious and sustained way, and asking the kinds of questions that we need to ask to move a democracy forward. Questions like, how do you know that? Right. And that's to me, a classic question that helps us to move from content deliverers, which we are, and which all social studies teachers at any age and stage are, to people who are inspiring civic dispositions, right? Um, we're in an era, as perhaps you have noticed, of low trust in institutions. And it is a privilege to serve in a relatively highly trusted kind of institution. Museums and libraries still have strong backing in public trust. And, when we get this serious question of how do you know it, we, like others in our space, are able to say, it's in this letter here, right? Or it's in this archaeological artifact that came out of the ground right in front of the house. You just walked by the dig site. And that's a transportable civic skill, right? To ask how you know what you know, and to bring that to all sources of news and information, and know what it likes, know what it looks like to go back to a primary source. So the willingness to have those discussions with people who come from all walks of life. We serve almost every zip code in the United States. We serve people who have not been in a history classroom in decades, or people who have been in a history classroom in other countries who have never learned the American founding. We get the question quite regularly, when did Jefferson write the Emancipation Proclamation, right? It's not that you need to come in with you don't need to come in with a 5 on your US history AP to wrestle with complex knowledge, right? Of our, in some ways, um, I think most substantive and also multifaceted founder. The willingness of people, right out of high school, 10 years out of high school, with a high school degree, a GED, a master's degree, an MBA. That gives me hope. And the response to this Founding Friends, Founding Foes tour has been terrific. On the weekends, we offer the Founding Friends, Founding Foes tour with a Feast of Reason experience afterwards. And seeing people talk to total strangers about serious things with courage and conviction is, I think Jefferson would smile.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Jane Kamensky. And if folks want to get in touch with Monticello, with Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, or support your work, how can they do that?
You can reach out to me by mail. I don't think I have a way to put something in the whole chat, do I?
I don't think so for the whole group, but people can
But
go to
Anna can share,
monticello.org, right?
and I'm my email is on the website, and I would be happy to route you to any place on my team that your question belongs. Come see us. Fall is an absolutely spectacular season here, and we're already seeing the 2026 uptick, and hope it continues.